So welcome to this very special edition of the Pondilit Fest at the Upward Studio in Delhi. We have a very special guest, Dr. Meenakshi Jain, and we are here today to discuss her new book, Vasudeva Krishna and Mathura. It's an extremely important book. During the conversation, we will know exactly why. So thank you very much. And
thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Okay. So Meenakshi ji, I will not waste any time and I will directly come into the content of the book. And I will start with the first phase of the book with a summary of the content from your own sentence. The evolution of the Bhagavata cult summed up the Indian spiritual tradition. Assimilate all expressions of sacred and assimilate so completely that it was impossible to tell who was the assimilator and who the assimilated. So first tell us a little bit about the first phase and tell us why you needed to do this.
Very important question. The thing is that for the last half century, at least, there has been a trend among Indian scholars of a particular point of view to view Indian religion, Indian culture, Indian civilization as a story of conflict. Conflict between the upper castes, the lower castes, between men, women, it's all conflict. But if you actually look at the reality, you find, and that is why I have given the example of Krishna, because you find that these are artificial barriers, artificial divides created by scholars. But at the actual level, there is no evidence of this. And I have given the example of Krishna because the first reference that we get to Krishna, Vasudeva Krishna, is in the Chandogya Upanishad. And in the Rig Veda, there is a god Vishnu. Then there is Narayan, and then there is Krishna Gopal. So these are various deities or forms of sacred or forms of consciousness that were present in our spiritual heritage. Now, Vasudeva Krishna appears, according to most scholars, most leading scholars of India, till the 20th century. I am giving the examples of H.C. Ray Chaudhary, D.C. Sarkar, R.N. Dandekar, and important Western scholars like Hopkins and Grierson. When they studied the phenomena of Krishna, they said that the study of the texts and the evidence available to us leads us to come to the conclusion that there was a historical personality, Krishna, Vasudeva Krishna. Why do they come to this conclusion? Because the Chandogya Upanishad, which is dated to around the 9th or 8th century BCE, says there is Devaki Putra Krishna. Now that's a very, very specific reference, and it mentions the name of Devaki Putra's teacher and also the teachings that the teacher taught him. However, to answer your question, over a period of several centuries, we find that this Vasudeva Krishna is also presented as a form of Vishnu, and it is also a form of Narayan, and most important in the context of today, he embraces Vasudeva, the Krishna Gopal. Now, Krishna Gopal was a deity who was worshipped by the Gwala community, and we all are familiar with the stories of Krishna's childhood in Gokul, his pranks with his mother, the cow herds, etc. So, over a period of several centuries, we have to understand this phenomena does not occur overnight, it is spread over centuries. So, over centuries, Vasudeva Krishna embraces all these. And how does he embrace them? Vasudeva Krishna is presented as an avatar of Vishnu. So he embraces the Vedic Vishnu and Narayan, and the last incorporation is of Gopal, Vasudeva Gopal. And what is important is that when the Vedic gods are assimilated into Vasudeva Krishna, the religion of Vasudeva Krishna becomes Vaishnav from the name Vishnu. So you understand how that process of amalgamation is taking place. Vishnu, the name, because Vishnu was such an important deity in the Ved, in the Rig Ved, and Krishna Gopal becomes an important deity later. The religion that Vasudeva Krishna teaches gets the name of Vaishnavism from Vishnu. So this is a very subtle and non-violent form of embracing, because as I said, the Hindu tradition was never to exclude anyone but to include, embrace and elevate. So now if Vedic Vishnu has been incorporated into Bhagavad religion and it's called Vaishnav after him, it's very interesting that the most popular form of Vishnu worship or Krishna worship today is the cowherd Krishna. So a deity who was being worshipped by the Abhira community, the cowherd community, has been elevated to an all India deity, worshipped by whether you are a Brahmin or a Kshatriya. The caste followers, there is no distinction between a Brahmin follower or a Kshatriya follower. So this is the way we assimilate. A deity of the cowherds is now an all India deity worshipped across all sections of society and all parts of India. So this is what I wanted to convey.
So it was important to establish this chronology, but like you mentioned, there were certain attempts to subvert the notions of Hinduism and worship. Can you mention a few of the elements of the propaganda of the other side that your particular research debunks?
See, the thing is that, as I said, till the mid 20th century there was a consensus among all scholars that there was a historical figure, Krishna. Now they were doing their own research. They were not interested in what the popular, because for the believers of Krishna there is no doubt. They were not in doubt, they were not seeking validation from scholars, but scholars pursue their own research on the basis of what their concerns are. And so this was the general consensus. After the mid 20th century, there was a concerted attempt by certain scholars to dismiss Krishna as a mythical figure, or as somebody who didn't exist but was a creation of maybe some vested interest. So this scholarship becomes dominant from the mid 20th century onwards. And what I feel, I could be wrong, but the attempt of scholarship in the last 50 years has been to denigrate the popular beliefs and the sacred beliefs of the Hindu community. So I look upon it from that perspective. Though I have to say that because this issue of Krishna and Mathura has not become so contentious right now, the left intervention has not been as deadly and as lethal as it was in the case of Ayodhya, because that became a very burning issue, and there you could see the extent to which a certain class of historians went to falsify, distort and invent history. But because maybe Mathura has not yet reached that popular debate on this, the intervention so far has been mainly to say that he was not a historical character, he was a mythical character.
So now we'll come to also the later chapters where you have to make the connection of Vasudeva Krishna with the physical geographical space of Mathura.
Yes.
So how did you establish that?
That is really fantastic. But at the outset, I would like to say that this work had been done almost a century ago, with a little bit of work in the last 2-3 decades, but the fundamental work had been done by archaeologists and epigraphists in the early 20th century. It's sad that that has not percolated to the popular level. We are always looking for validation, whereas the validation was available to us. So to come to your question, Mathura has been associated with Krishna in the popular imagination for ever since we can recall. And I want to draw your attention to an inscription that was found and interpreted by a Western scholar who worked on the plays in Mathura. So, when did Mathura start staging plays in honor of Krishna? So, he found that inscription and he says that for over 2000 years, Mathura has been staging plays on the life of Krishna. And what was this inscription that he found? It was an inscription which describes a family of actors. And it says that they are actors in the sense they are very proficient in music. They can sing, they can dance, and all the qualifications that an actor needs. And they stage plays on the life of these two brothers, Vasudeva and his brother. Now, I come to your specific question, but before I answer that question, I want to clarify that no evidence in Mathura is complete. Mathura has been an unfortunate city in the sense that it was subjected to repeated invasions till the 18th century. And we don't have to speculate on the invasions because there are enough eyewitness accounts of those periods. So, it is not you saying this or me saying this, the evidence speaks for itself. So, whatever we have is just a coincidence. It is a happy coincidence because otherwise we would not have known this history. So, the first evidence that we have, and this is inscription. Inscriptions is something that nobody can distort. Whatever ideology you may belong to, you cannot distort an inscription, and more so when that inscription has been deciphered and made public almost 90 years ago. So, for 90 years you do not challenge the inscription, how can you suddenly challenge it? And this inscription is the Vasu door jam inscription. Only a part of it has survived, the full inscription is not there, but the eminent historian and epigraphist R.P. Chanda was the first person to translate this inscription. And since so many words are missing, he put together his reading of the inscription after filling in the missing words, and he said that this inscription talk is by a person who has dedicated this inscription. It is a person called Vasu. And that inscription says that I am creating this structure, and it describes, part of the inscription describes that structure. It describes the arch, the toran, then there is a rectangle in the middle, and then there are buildings all around. This is what the inscription says. And luckily for us, what survives is very important. It says, I am creating this structure for Vasudeva. Now, that Vasudeva name there is very important. And then, where am I creating this structure? I am creating this structure at the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Now, Mahasthan by every interpretation means great place. So, before 15 Common Era, that means over 2000 years ago, there is an inscription which says that I am erecting this structure in the name, in favor of Vasudeva at the Mahasthan of Vasudeva. Now, that Mahasthan can mean either the birthplace or a place connected with an important event in the life of Krishna, for example, the killing of Kans. We don't know, but it can be. But people who say that Katra Keshav Dev, because this inscription is found there, people who say that Katra Keshav Dev was associated with Vasudeva Krishna since time immemorial, they present this inscription as the first proof of a Krishna temple at that site. So, this is very important. And more, the inscription mentions the ruler, because the part of the inscription is damaged. So, it mentions the ruler, it is a Shaka ruler, and that Shaka ruler's reign ended in 15 Common Era. So it has to be at least 10-15 years before that.
Yes.
So there is no doubt about the name of the ruler, but the other data is damaged. And even more important, just a little while later, there is the Mora well inscription. The Mora well inscription was found by Alexander Cunningham inside a well. Because Mathura was devastated so many times, so murtis are found somewhere, inscription is found somewhere, whatever it is. So this Mora well inscription says that I am erecting a stone structure. A stone structure means it can be a temple, it can be whatever, in honor of the 5 Vrishni heroes. Now you know that Krishna belonged to the Vrishni clan, and the 5 heroes included him and 4 immediate members of his family, including his elder brother Sankarshan, his own son Pradyumna, Anirudh and Samba. So imagine this inscription also around the same time says that we are erecting this stone structure. The word stone structure is there, that means it's quite a big building. And the Vasu door jam, I wanted to tell you, the surviving part is 8.5 feet tall. So 8.5 feet tall, the surviving, not the full inscription, means it was a pretty large building that was erected. And similarly, this Mora door jam talks about a stone structure to house the 5 Vrishni heroes. And it is absolutely fascinating story that in 1911, Alexander Cunningham excavated that site, and there he found 2 torsos. The head and the legs are missing. And I am giving you the opinions of the most reputed scholars then and now. Some of the scholars who have propounded this thesis are still alive, and they are highly respected people. They have nothing to do with the Indian academic scene or with Indian politics. They are just above this, and they are very, very reputed people. And they say that these 2 torsos found near the Mora well inscription, which talks about 7 images that we are going to house in this stone structure, they belong very, very likely to Vasudeva and Sankarshan. That is Vasudeva Krishna and his elder brother Sankarshan. And that story doesn't end there. Some time later, a 3rd statue was found, that is of a female. The top part is missing, but the bottom part is there, and the pedestal. And the pedestal has an inscription. And again, these reputed scholars, they say that this is probably the sister of Sankarshan and Vasudeva. So this kind of evidence, if the debate on Krishna becomes a public debate at some point, we don't know how things are going to pan out, but if it becomes a public debate, there is no way that this evidence can be debunked or reinterpreted or rejected, because Cunningham found this in 1911. So it's more than a century. So for this 1 century, because this was not an issue, there was no reaction. But supposing this issue of Mathura becomes an issue of public debate and public concern, then you cannot give another interpretation to an inscription, and it's very difficult to reinterpret an inscription because it's all there and anyone can read it. So, and I believe you have been to Mathura and actually seen the Vasu door jam and taken pictures of it and saw the inscription in the back.
Yes, I have.
So,
yes, and when you visit it, like this, to transition to the next phase, when you visit the museum, you actually are confronted with the pillaging you described so vividly with primary sources of the time in the book. But before we talk about the way Hindu society resisted and kept on gaining back that space, a propensity that you have elaborated so beautifully in your previous book, I would like to talk a little bit more about invaders in general, because we know you have talked about extensively about our resistance to gain back our sacred spaces. But we don't talk, when we talk of invaders, like you said, we talk of very often associated with the defeated people.
yes.
But somewhere this correction has to be made. And also, with someone like you, I would like to take the opportunity for you to nuance invader with invader.
Yes.
And what has been the history of invaders, resistance, military resistance, martial resistance, as well as the quality of invaders, because there has been a certain type who have been a certain influence on us and a certain type that has had a different influence. So could you handle that first? Then we'll go to the reclamation of that space.
Fantastic question. You know, the Arabs and the Turks were not the first people to invade India. India attracted people right from the beginning. And in fact, there is a theory that Pythagoras also came to India. You know, and there is a reference, and you know, he's called Yavan whatever. And the teachings of Pythagoras are very we all know about the theorem and that, you know, but the teachings of Pythagoras beyond that theorem are very similar to what were the current teachings in India then, and that remain current till today. So leaving aside Pythagoras, we had not one invader but a whole series of invaders in the ancient period. The thing is that they did not conquer the whole of India. They conquered parts of India, northwestern parts. And if I can give the example of Menander. Menander was a Bactrian Greek, and he's been immortalized in the play Miland Pano, The Questions of King Milinda. So he was a king, and the story is that, you know, he went around defeating people in religious debates, and then he comes and meets the Buddhist teacher Nagsen, and he is defeated in his arguments, and he gets converted to Buddhism. So this is a story that repeats itself in the ancient period. We do not know of any invader who captured parts of India and tried to impose his belief system on the people. There is no. Now, so I gave this example of Menander, and in fact, you will be surprised to know that, you know, when Menander died, then Plutarch says that his remains were distributed among the cities that were part of his kingdom. You know, recalling the story of Buddha's ashes being distributed among the clans who were his followers. So they say that when Menander died, his remains were distributed among the cities that were part of his kingdom. Apart from that, we have the Shakas. The Shakas ruled over parts of India, and they were great followers of Buddhism. The Mathura lion capital inscription. It is 2 lions, and there is an inscription over there. That inscription has been dedicated by the ruler, the Shaka ruler's wife. And she says, I'm donating for the Buddhist. You know, and she gives what she is donating. Kanishk, we know the Kushans. They were very, very, proud followers of Buddhism, and Kanishk held the Buddhist council, and all that is known. But what is really surprising is the Huns. The Huns had a reputation of being barbaric and, you know, destroying and looting cities along the way. But Meherkula, who is perhaps regarded as the most ferocious of the Huns in India, Alexander Cunningham found an inscription in Gwalior Fort which talks about Meherkula's conversion to Shaivism. Okay. So the thing is that, they all entered India by war. So in the war, obviously there is killing on both sides. But once they capture political power, there is no reference that I know of where any of them tyrannize the people or force them to change their faith. In fact, every evidence points to them accepting the faith of the people they had conquered. So this is the story, and and this story changes with the coming of the Arabs and Turks. And I'll come to that, but just to complete this story, this tendency of the foreign rulers to accept was even noted by Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni, who came with Mahmud Ghaznavi and wrote Al-Hind, which is the most comprehensive book on India at that time. It's an outstanding work. And he says that, you know, these people, the Hindus, had no feeling of revulsion towards foreigners before we came. So now to come to your question of resistance. You see, if you look at the history of Islam, within 100 years of the death of Muhammad, they had spread Egypt, Syria, Persia, Spain, France, Africa, parts of Africa. They met hardly much resistance. You know, it was like knife cutting through butter. But when they came to the shores of Al-Hind, 75 years it took them to capture just Sindh. 3 tiny kingdoms, Sindh, Kabul and Zabul. They kept them at bay for 4 centuries. 75 years to conquer Sindh, and even when they conquered Sindh, it is not that it was over and done with. The local population, they went on resisting, overthrowing. It had to be conquered again and again. People who converted, they went back, like Dahir, King Raja Dahir put up such a sterling struggle. His son was forcibly converted. But when the Arabs went back, he immediately went back to his religion and mounted a fight. And Dahir's queen, one of the queens with her followers, she committed Johar because she said, I do not want to fall into the hands of these people. So this is, and imagine 400 years almost it takes to establish control over Punjab. So the resistance that they met in India was a total surprise even for the caliphs, because, you know, they never thought, and, you know, we should remember the sacrifices that these people made. The Hindu Shahi family, Jaipal, his son Anand Pal, Trilochan Pal, Bhim Pal, 4 generations were wiped out resisting the invasions. And again, I want to quote Al-Biruni, he pays them such fulsome tribute. He says that this Hindu Shahi family is now extinct, but they will always be remembered for the valor with which they fought to defend. So, you know, if your so-called enemy, I don't regard Al-Biruni as an enemy by any chance. He was a very, very profound writer, thinker, and he studied India with such care and understanding and depth. When he writes this as a tribute to the Hindu Shahis, it shows that people on the other side were also moved by the struggle that was put up. So, you know, the tragedy is that, you know, the history that is taught to us, it is, you know, that the people in the subcontinent were fools or they were weak, and they just allowed the invader to come, and the invader met no resistance. But this story of resistance and heroic resistance is something that needs to be put back in our, you know, history books, in our syllabus, in our curriculum. It's important to know.
You know, I can't resist telling our viewers that this resistance of 4 centuries that Meenakshi ji talks about is actually written by her in a textbook, and it exists. And if you read that textbook, and if that textbook was taught in our schools, each and every student in this country would have known of this 4 centuries of resistance. And it's a pity that Al-Biruni should say that, you know, India should never forget these 4 heroes. Yes. But we have, thanks to the skewed history that we are taught in our textbooks. So a reminder yet again, the book exists. It was commissioned by the Vajpayee government. Pick it up, read it. If the schools don't do it yourselves in your homes. So Meenakshi ji, now to move to, we'll bring back the resistance to Mathura. And of course, there was starting from Ghaznavi to Gori. You have chronicled each and every invader and the pillaging, especially the Afghans. I read that bit and I had to read it out to the children. I don't think it's something they can overcome. The decapitated heads, the heaps of, and the children, and the price put on a head.
Yes.
That is graphically described here. And if you want, you can just chronicle them briefly. But what I would like you to concentrate on, and especially again, because this is a major point of current academical distortion, is Aurangzeb, who is the last of the marauders. And this whole attempt to whitewash him and present him as some sort of a, I don't know, a deliverer. like you do best, with sources of the times that describe Aurangzeb for what he was, unselfconsciously. It's not that they knew that, 500 years later somebody would interpret them differently.
Yeah.
So if you can just build that case of what this distortion has meant and
so
what are they
your question is in two parts.
Yes.
First is the resistance, the fate of Mathura till Aurangzeb, and then a separate section on Aurangzeb.
Yes.
And I think that Aurangzeb really needs to be exposed for what he was, because there is a very strong trend in Western academia and partly also in Indian academia to present Aurangzeb as a kind of Sufi and as a very benign kind of ruler. No, but it's important to correct these things and present the other side to the viewers at least. Now, as you said, Mathura was first attacked in the time of Mahmud Ghaznavi, and again I want to say that all the sources that I am quoting are there available in the public realm. Most of these books have been translated and they are available freely on the net. So never accept what I am saying or what anyone else is saying. It's always good to check the things yourself, because now most of the material is available on the net, so it's a very great advantage. So Mahmud Ghaznavi's invasion was again chronicled by Utbi, who came with Mahmud Ghaznavi, and he wrote in graphic details about the temples that were there in Mathura, and beautifully described by Utbi the architecture of the temples, the sculptural details, and how minutely the sculptures were depicted on the outer walls. So all that is there. So Mahmud Ghaznavi attacked Mathura and destroyed. Now again I am repeating the importance of the inscriptions that have survived. After Mahmud Ghaznavi left, there was total chaos in Mathura, and you will find an inscription in a well, a murti somewhere else. But by chance there is again a fragment of an inscription written by a vassal of the Gahadwala dynasty. Now the Gahadwala dynasty stood forth as the defenders of India, and in fact the Gahadwala king Govind Chandra is even said to have levied a tax on his subjects which would help him to raise an army to fight the Turks. Turushka Dand, this was the name of the tax. So in any case, there was this vassal of the Gahadwalas, Jhaja was his name, and he rebuilt that temple 100 years after Mahmud. We have no information on Jhaja, only because of his inscription that we know something about him. And if this inscription had not survived, we would not have known that a small vassal of the Gahadwalas had the desire, the commitment and the courage to re-erect that temple. What does it show? It shows how deeply ingrained this spiritual, or what you want to call religious tradition, was in all the inhabitants. What did Jhaja get out of building the temple? But he felt that he had to do it, and this is the only inscription that has survived which tells us that a temple was built. If this inscription had not survived, we would not have known that the temple was rebuilt within a century of Mahmud Ghaznavi's attack, because no other record we have. So after that we have Farishta, he wrote a little later, but he and Abdullah also give references to attacks on Mathura by Firoz Tughlaq and Sikandar Lodhi. So they give those. And then we have this traveller, foreign traveller. He actually visited Akbar's court and he stayed there for some time, and he came to Mathura because they would go around, and he says that I went to Mathura, only one temple was standing, the rest were in ruins or whatever, and this is the temple that he describes. So perhaps that temple that Jhaja built, perhaps it was repaired or whatever was done to it, because Father Montserrat sees that temple when he comes to Mathura. So then after that we have this no knowledge of what happens there, until the time of Jahangir, when he rebuilds Bir Singh Bundela rebuilds the temple. Now this story of Bir Singh Bundela is also very interesting. Shall I narrate it?
Yes. It's there in the book also.
Yeah. So I thought in case you want me to narrate it, or shall we move on? We can move on.
Okay.
We can move on. That
basically you're establishing the fact that every time a Muslim ruler came, that is Ghaznavi, Ghori, Lodi, and then you had Aurangzeb. Every time there was a space where the Hindus took the opportunity to rebuild and reclaim the space.
So the thing is that the temple which was
you have to deal with Aurangzeb. And
now we are coming to Aurangzeb. So now what I was telling you was that there is an attempt by certain academics to say that Aurangzeb was not a bigoted person, and he actually took a bigoted stand only because he was involved in the war of succession with his brother Dara, and he wanted the support of the ulema, etc. But it is important to counter this argument. When Shah Jahan was at the peak of his power and Aurangzeb was just a prince, he was posted to Gujarat as viceroy. And what did he do in Gujarat? There was a beautiful temple which was constructed by the leading jeweler of that city, Shanti Das. Shanti Das was a very powerful jeweler, and he actually used to even supply jewels to the Mughal emperors. So Aurangzeb as prince went there, desecrated that Jain temple and converted it into a mosque or masjid. Now Shanti Das was appalled, and he wrote to Shah Jahan, what have we done to deserve this? And Shah Jahan was not a liberal by any chance. He was himself destroying temples in Banaras. But because of the location of Gujarat with its port cities and commerce, etc., and Shanti Das's position as the leading economic figure of that area, he thought that he cannot ignore him or annoy him. So he recalled Aurangzeb, and then he directed the Mughal officials over there in Gujarat, please hand over the masjid to the Jains. Shanti Das and the Jains said, now we have no use for it, because it has been desecrated by the killing of an animal. But the surprising story, Alu, doesn't stop here. Long after Aurangzeb had died, and long after Shanti Das had died, in the mid 18th century, the Jains brought up, at that time they had said the murtis have got khandit, so we are not taking. So in the mid 18th century, after both these protagonists had died, the Jains brought out those images in a procession and stated them in the public where they could be worshipped. So this, this kind of commitment to your heritage is something that you come across again and again in the medieval period. So imagine they kept the murtis hidden in some place, and when they thought that the worst of Mughal rule is over, then they brought them and showed them in public. So this is one aspect of. Now after Aurangzeb became king, in the first year of his reign, he destroyed a temple of Shiva in Kashi, Prithivisheshwar temple. He destroyed it in the first year of him becoming king. And there is a small tank over there. That tank marks the spot where the first, second and third reconstruction of that temple had taken place. And on Shivratri day, the devotees would still go to that tank and make an offering. And the mutawallis of the masjid would take away the offerings. And in the 19th century, Raja Patnimal of Banaras, whom we will hear of later, he built the temple again, a small temple. So it was destroyed in the first year of Aurangzeb's reign. First, second, third reconstructions, all demolished. Tank as the place where the temple had been rebuilt, and Raja Patnimal in the time of the British rule, in the time of East India Company rule, he said, now I have to rebuild that temple. In Kashi, the Vishwanath temple, it was destroyed by Aibak, Kutubuddin Aibak, it's recorded. And that Queen Razia, she ruled for only 4 years. And in those 4 years, she was hounded by all the nobility and all that. But in those 4 years, she found time to build Razia Mosque there. And soon after that, a small temple was built for that Kashi. The name was kept Kashi Vishwanath temple, and it was just a small room, just the ling is fitted, and outside it looked like a mausoleum. Because there was fear that if it looks like a temple from outside, it will invite attack. So make the building look as neutral as possible and no decoration, anything from out. This was another feature of the medieval period, that buildings that were reconstructed after the demolition, they all had plain walls. So he destroyed this Kriti Visheshwar, he destroyed the Vishwanath temple, and now to come to Mathura. So in Mathura, again all these stories of destruction have been recorded in Persian accounts. So in Mathura, because that is where we are supposed to come back to, so in 1669 he forbade the celebration of Holi, Diwali and the destruction of temples, and in 1670 gave a specific order for the destruction of the Kashi Krishna temple. The eyewitness accounts include those of Saki Mustaid Khan. He wrote in Persian. His work has been translated by Jadunath Sarkar, and that account is freely available. And the Italian visitor Manucci. Manucci was also there, and the name of the city was changed to Islamabad. Now, shall I just go fast forward?
So I'll just, in the sense that after this, the pillaging period, you have 2 periods of litigation. Basically, you have the period when the Marathas occupied the space, and then it was handed over to, it was taken over by the East India Company, and that is where the East India Company auctioned that sacred space in totality, which is, I think, the most key point here, to Raja Patnimal of Banaras. So you can pick it up from there, and then also after that round it off with the later sale. In the
so I'll just be very brief. 1757, Ahmad Shah Abdali invaded Mathura. That account is available by a person who was his camp follower. He's given a detailed graphic account. You can read it in the book. It doesn't make polite conversation to narrate it over here. But in any case, now in 1770, after the Battle of Govardhan, the Marathas got control of Agra and Mathura, and they treated this area as Nazul or government land. In 1803, when the East India Company defeated the Marathas, it continued the same policy. And when Marathas came in 1770, the Maulvis and all of the Eidgah left that place. So we know that they left that place because they said, we'll go and look for livelihood elsewhere else. In 1803, the East India Company acquires this area, and it continues the Maratha policy. Now in 1815, they auctioned this entire 13.37 acres to Raja Patnimal. It's auctioned and Raja Patnimal gets it. Now the important point is what Alu made, and that is that the entire Katra Keshav Dev, 13.37 acres, was auctioned and sold in totality. It was never partitioned or divided. It remained Katra Keshav Dev, 13.37 acres. Raja Patnimal and his family, they faced a lot of litigation from 1815 onwards in the British courts. I don't know how when those litigants came back, that is not clear. But from 1815, they went to British courts. A succession of British judges heard their cases in great detail, and their judgments, which I have reproduced here, I think perhaps for the first time that they are available to the ordinary people. It shows how carefully the British judges heard the case and with what thought, deliberation and evidence they rejected the Eidgah party every time. So there is no case that the Eidgah party won from 1815 till 1947. In 1944, the heirs of Raja Patnimal sold this 13.3 acres to 37 acres to Seth Jugal Kishore Birla. In 1944 they sold it. In 1951, Jugal Kishore Birla created a trust, Shri Krishna and Janambhoomi Trust, with Madan Mohan Malviya and 2 others as trustees. The objective was to create a grand temple for Krishna. So, this is clear, all the documents are there in the public domain, anyone can check them. Now, this twist in the tale, if I can put it, I was not aware of this. I came, my book was complete, and then a lawyer, Vishnu Jain, and his father, they filed a case in the Mathura district court. So, I was curious what is the case that they have filed, and I got the papers of that case. That case is that Shri Krishna Janambhoomi Trust, created by Jugal Kishore Birla, is the only legal heir to the entire 13.37 acres. But this Vishnu Jain says that at some point a new organization called Shri Krishna Janamsthan Seva Sangh comes into being. People file cases in the Mathura courts against this Seva Sangh. The Mathura courts say that we do not recognize Seva Sangh because there is no authentic proof of its existence. We have no papers, nothing. We recognize only Janambhoomi Trust created by Birla. But lo and behold, in 1968, this Seva Sangh enters into an agreement with the Eidgah party and surrenders 3 acres of Katra Keshav Dev to Eidgah party. This is the complaint that has been filed by Vishnu Jain. This entire bit, the last 10 pages, are based on what he has filed in. I have no evidence on that, I have based it on his case. But the questions that arise, who authorized Seva Sangh to hand over? Because in no case was the 13.37 acres disputed, and it was always a unit, it was never divided. So, who authorized Seva Sangh? Was there some political pressure? The Seva Sangh has never explained, and it kept the agreement secret. Second point, the masjid as it stands now, where is it situated? Is it situated in the 3 acres that it got?
Yes.
And Cunningham, who was the last person to file the report, Alexander Cunningham, he said this plinth of the temple is the foundation of the Eidgah. And he says that looking at the size of the plinth, it was one of the largest temples in India. And he says now the masjid is in a dilapidated condition, and it can be even actually demolished and excavations kept under it. Now the thing is that Cunningham says it's a dilapidated structure, but the structure that is there today is not dilapidated.
Not at all.
So the thing is, when was this structure constructed? Was it constructed on 3 acres of land? The Seva Sangh has to come and give it some explanation, because all members of the Seva Sangh have not passed away. That body is there, and the agreement between the Seva Sangh and the Eidgah party has been reproduced by Vishnu Jain in his appeal to the court. So, according to Vishnu Jain, this Eidgah is built after 1968. If it is built after 1968, as he says, then the Places of Worship Act of 1991 does not apply to it, because the Places of Worship Act says that the sacred character of a building as it stood in 1947 shall not be changed except in the case of Ayodhya, because there the litigation had already started. So, according to Vishnu Jain, this present structure is constructed after 1968. So, this does not apply to it. So, it is a whole series of possibilities that opens up. It is very difficult to say how the case will go, what the attitude of the court will be, but the final clinching proof that maybe things are going in a particular direction is that the Supreme Court in March 2021 agreed to examine the validity of the People's Worship Act of 1990.
So, the judicial proceedings of the British are presented in their detail here. I encourage all of you to read it. The language shows the vehemence of the dismissal of the petitions filed by the Eidgah party, and also the final twist. We talked of invaders, we talked of Abrahamic faiths and all, but ultimately, Meenakshi ji, we are breeding enemies of our faith and civilization post independence.
That is our fault.
That is our fault, and that is actually the saddest cut, and that's why this book reads like a page turner with twists. I can't imagine a history book being that engrossing, and yes, I mean you have villains of epic proportions spanning the ages, including as late as 1968.
Yes.
So, but I'm glad we went beyond the book, because
Yes.
that is very important with a person like your scholarship. But I would still take 5 minutes from you. You have written the first book I have seen of yours, which you recommended to me, in fact, what it meant to be a Hindu during the times of the Muslims, and when people mention the book, nobody really mentions parallel pathways
Yes.
enough. So what did you mean to achieve when you wrote Parallel Pathways? I want you to quickly go through your books and just tell us, like, what has been the contribution of your research and presentation in altering our perception of our past and certain very key issues like Sati or like Ayodhya.
You see, I will just answer this question about the first question that
Yes.
you asked. I don't know whether I have made a contribution or not, but I was teaching in, I mean it's very difficult to give an alternative view, because the dominant view is so dominant. And when I was teaching in Delhi University, I was struck about the extent to which the syllabus went to erase all the ugly aspects of the medieval period. It's not that India had not had invaders before,
Yes.
but we never made any attempt to whitewash their rule, perhaps because there was no need. But the systematic way in which the medieval period was sought to be whitewashed was something that was really very disturbing. And I will just give you one example from a medieval textbook, which was before I wrote my. For example, in Delhi University, just to elaborate on that, in Delhi University, the medieval paper, the topic was always teachings of Guru Nanak and Kabir. But it was not ever the Mughal policy towards the Sikh gurus. So, because that policy towards the Sikh gurus, Jahangir, what he did, Shah Jahan had problems, and Aurangzeb, of course. So, that means you are sanitizing. You are so cleverly talking about the teachings of Guru Nanak, but you are not talking about Mughal policy towards the Sikh gurus. And then I saw the medieval India textbook written by a leading left historian. It said, after Guru Arjan's death by Jahangir. Now, death is a natural process,
Yes.
but death by Jahangir means actually he was executed or bumped off or killed or disposed by Jahangir. And this is the extent to which you are whitewashing the thing. You are saying death by Jahangir. What is the meaning of this death by Jahangir? So I mean this, and I started looking at the whole thing again, and I felt that generation and after generation of students is getting fed on this, and that history that all of us were familiar with is no longer the popular history that people know. So it's important, though nobody may read that book, but at least if anybody is interested, it's there on record. So this whole attempt to rewrite our history, and then these historians, they accuse the other side of distorting, but the record of their distortion is something that is really shocking and disturbing. I mean, on Ayodhya they went to any extent to distort, and the Ayodhya High Court, the Allahabad High Court and the Supreme Court, the kind of strictures that it passed against the eminent historians, and nobody has ever felt the need to come and apologize or to explain why they told lies in court. So it's a long subject of discussion, but as a teacher in Delhi University, seeing that I am teaching the teachings of Guru Nanak but not the Mughal policy, which is a very painful episode, So these are things, some of the things that compelled me to strike out a different path. But I just want to say last thing, that it's not easy to strike out a different path. It's much more comfortable and rewarding to follow the path, because you are taken care of in every way. But if you write against the dominant current, you get ostracized very fast, and it takes a long time for you to rehabilitate yourself on your terms and to establish the validity of the work that you are doing. It takes a long time.
Okay, so I'm optimistic, because if from the time when no publisher wanted to publish your book on your research on Ayodhya, to today when Meenakshi ji appears on a Twitter space, and you have thousands of followers on Twitter, and someone like Professor Anand Ranganathan hosts you, and you're becoming very popular. You're being mainstreamed.
That is thanks to people like Anand Ranganathan, Vikram Sampath and Sai Deepak, because they have such a massive following that their hard work, I get the benefit of it.
And they look up to you.
And you are instrumental also.
Thank you so much. No. I just do whatever I can in the space of my classroom. So, but that's a very good, it's a positive note I would like to end this on, to think that an author like Dr. Meenakshi Jain, go back to her old books, go back to her entire work. And it is true that since Ayodhya and also Sati and Flights of the Deities, you are much more read. But go back to her earlier books.
I just want to say one thing, that Ayodhya book was rejected again and again.
Yes.
But the stand of the Allahabad High Court, where it exposed the left, and the stand of the Supreme Court, the left scholars have lost a lot of ground on that.
Yes,
count.
That is what I mean. If you read the book on Ayodhya, there's an entire portion at the end where she has quoted the reprimand, nothing short of really strict reprimand by the courts on these historians who say that, I think there was an example of someone's, my husband knows Persian, I don't.
My father-in-law.
Yes, the excuses are baffling, and the point is that up until that point they have not been questioned.
Yes.
Today, through your books, and hopefully they get more and more popularized, you'll be one solid scholar, popular among the people.
Thank you so much.
And your books, yes, you're making a difference, believe me. So with that, we end today's session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed reading the book and talking to you about it and visiting Mathura at the same time.
I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is very, very inspiring. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thank Upward again for giving us this space. And yes, with that we conclude this session. Thank you.